Welcome to Tidbit Talkin. Have some ideas about a fictional thing, each one featuring different levels of seriousness. Spoilers, here we go. It's my party and I'll die if I want to. Wally referring to years as sun journeys isn't just some cool Zen stuff, but rather a consideration for how furiously fast folks like him and Mr. Somewhat Big Red perceive time's passage quite differently than typical clock watchers. Rosso contempt celibate monk-trained individuals like Mr. West over here with lustful junk because his super black goo essence becomes the blood, which causes boner action. Ramsey didn't know Chester doesn't drink because said fellow was stuck in that Mac deal during his first attack. He didn't have time to figure this out right before these events because going through those two heroic heads simply took a bit too much time for side gig allowing. Kion's only idea is freezing initially because she's still focusing on frosty fatality funkiness right now, especially with that one guy recently fleeing. Barry's subconscious doesn't construct his own purgatory because the dude's personal mental crap can't really comprehend how temporary holding areas work, since every prison's been perfectly escapable thus far. He can't really be truly trapped, only voluntarily angered, like his short incarceration stint from halfway through this series. Thinking of future family fun for comfort is what inspired him to use his daughter's sorta signature maneuver in this battle. A New World, Part 1. Mercury Labs got chosen for the Crystal's home base because it's somewhere that both Eddie and Ebert have been lots that's not all mortal enemy ran. What fleet-footed father's most likely worried about with regards to Nora accidentally hurting herself shenanigans is unintentional time rewinding. It's a very emotion-connected ability after all, thus temper tantrums would probably make it quite deadly. Barry seeks Tina at first because he's hoping she'd already have a tachyon prototype available to help with barrier-busting bunk. The Negative Speed Force's complete history-wrecking plan appears to hinge upon attacking every single fixed point all at once. Seems like something that necessitates all those other godly nature beings expending their strength holding things back instead of directly helping their champion. Stein seeking started since realizing he's near one of those recently mentioned supremely stationary situations made the mind of someone who's imagined time travel in more creative personal ways seem a better fit for helping hoopla. First, it's a nice half-truth so he won't feel too guilty for lying to his beloved parents. Next and last, it's a tribute to his second-born that's all front-minded currently because he's realizing acting impulsive is quite necessary during these events. Various reverses from before stranding stuff strikes must all be told by further future communications that Harrison Wells actually took out Matriarch Nora in order to prevent himself from doing so too soon and making Black Flash Generation act up or whatever. Plus, it gives him the bonus of thinking ending Henry's son right after his wife bites it causes double survival guilt misery action. A lightning blast must have been chosen for Joe's sonning after hearing Singh speaking, so the unconscious detective being found wouldn't cause too much temporal ruin on account of it being played off as a taser malfunction or something. The NSF apparently decided to wait until his costume ring got grabbed during breakfast time so he'd be lulled into a perfect known event recreation sort of mood. Intense fast anger energy may have subconsciously caused Season 1 protagonist Pal to be extra cautious when approaching this current battle. Intention to keep things the same for new family preserving sake almost definitely caused him to fuse with the first unseen Safe Parents timeline version upon his arrival here. Barry's speech towards his broken big bad doesn't state directly what he's going to do during his premiere heroic year, but also doesn't steer him away from that stuff at all. Basically, it's something even the original first timeline him could have said too. The more pleasant Ethon senses that negative lightning bolt before it strikes because his current surroundings being constructed by identical energy granted him nifty new instincts. A New World, Part 2. That pissiness entity ensured lots of folks would distrust nature, lady, so it'd have this new threat surrounded with easily possessed and or manipulated potential pawn people. In addition to real-life release mythology gag nonsense, that cobalt crystal being labeled 97 could be because it first showed up in universe during that year too. Evil higher powers must have chosen that point because it's when Eddie's family first moved to Central City. Something about guiding and controlling him as well, and not just the young Mr. Allen. Malcolm's life situation must have been set up in such a way that he'd experience formative feeling fuzziness that result in everything being taken away, causing him to become much more self-centered suggestion susceptible than his past self. Iris can sense their ultimate foe's presence right now because she can feel her baby's quickness essence getting drained. Related, Barry couldn't tell at first who he was really facing with possessed past Papa because recent thought encounters have muddied his feeling things out skills a bit. In contrast to 2 things ago, the presence of Speed Force Nora empowered a certain womb-contained similarly named child enough for even earlier birth action. Mystic Missy can't just bring anybody back to life because the vast majority of people don't experience a completely natural event-rooted demise. Getting constantly transported by Blue Bunk of Negative Speed Force origin must have reminded Main Flash enough about his initial lab accident that inspired him to empower those other 3 later. Eddie went without memories for so long because the being which just empowered him couldn't let go of keeping his body together until he developed a power bank large enough to jumpstart super healing whatnot, which would render self-bullet removal all tolerable and whatever. A New World Part 3. Barry perishing while the SF is all messed up would destroy the timeline because his status as both its current form creator and a multiverse restoring paragon really screws with metaphysical law nonsense. Fake blonde hypothetical child doesn't state a name because distressed dude didn't think of kid titles before sacrificing himself. He was way too busy worrying about whether or not certain newspapers were unavoidable. The possibility of cyborgs getting brought up might have something to do with Death and Return of Superman sort of events recently occurring in this world, making everybody all Henshaw focused when experiencing dangerous concern type emotions. All less than flashy fixed points getting messed with must not only be for pure history-reading purposes, but also so other time-traveling heroes are too distracted to help out these Lightning Runner-associated do-gooders. Anyway, kinda connected, but using a spherical chronology hopping device is probably totally screwed right now because the crystal would absorb its fatal fire-preventing cobalt resin. Iris wouldn't have told Nora that screw the future story because later on in life it felt like a rejection of her now-cherished family. The mental time travel plan would have been devised after going over some notes regarding Jane Barry's activities just before Crisis. Cecile gets chosen to implement it not just because of her powers, but also since as a former DA, she could navigate general city stuff much more easily than those less official allies. The negative Speed Force may have similar views to Still ones regarding experiencing every moment simultaneously because it's always okay with resetting and replacing current events. Loosely related, clock pinball CSI action occurring so frequently instead of just shrining him in one place for a long while might be because doing that to the guy drains his strength enough to grant a subtracting quick aura vitality boost during ultimate plan activation. Physically fighting his own daughter could make Barry seem like somebody who's not worth sacrificing one's own self for, which make Eddie at least as angry as when he chats with the aforementioned dude later. On that note, Panic Positive Person goes to Joe's house because it's a place they're both familiar with that he knows doesn't get occupied by non-secret privy individuals in any so far glimpsed future. Anyway, Barry figured out Baby Blue Brought Back Boy was currently living there after he cased the environment at super speed like his recently revisited friend mentor taught him years ago during peak rookie time. The Crystal almost definitely doesn't just show Eddie those past villains' visages, but also how they fared against Flash in combat and were subsequently defeated, so a viable battle plan could be formed. A New World Part 4. This relatively limited group of negatively revived speedsters was chosen because they won't get distracted by not Allen family hurting activities less personally tied folks such as Trajectory would care about. Connected, a pure Eobard isn't chosen because Cobalt Blue's ego really needs to see the version that failed hardest. Some random cop probably shot Hart right before he could take revenge on Bart. Seems a fitting end for one who's pretty much defined by delusions of grandeur. The sky-colored rock got a bit bigger and Eddie much stronger because they were trained together in this negative zone for years or even centuries before reviving everyone else. In other words, the evil version of what Barry experienced between seasons 3 and 4. Sorta similar to some tidbits back. Cisco, Wally, Ralph, Bart, and other more experienced allies would have been distracted by baddies with grudges against them, so main team formation is mostly restricted to folks who are seen as guaranteed losers. XS, the one not main red dude exception to that just mentioned lack of capability, gets roped in because Sappy Steel Slasher wants her experiencing a fate like Mommy once did. Anyway, the first self-proclaimed speed god suit doesn't produce white lightning anymore because it's made up of negative energy now and not earthly tech. Finally, their self-loathing over failing at defeating those supposedly incompetent crime fighters gives them enough anti-good feeling crud to turn them into better blue badness boosting bites when absorbing stuff happens. Another reason Welzabar got picked is because his absorbed memories render him distracted enough to not formulate any ancestor usurping plans, which possibly keep Eddie from getting a new life. Epically sarcastic Jitters guy might have a meta gene that activated some danger sensing powers after so many attacks on his workplace occurred over the years. Jay was able to avoid NSF attacks and show up as the ultimate helper here because omniscience evading is yet another trick he picked up from his Earth 90 counterpart, much like what's being shown right now. As was strongly implied some sentences ago, current Captain Catastrophe was actually meant to get talked down while remaining mostly unforgiving so he could start a legacy that ended up with a less self-destructing eager Professor Zoom getting born centuries later. Speaking of that, after Barry leaves, Eddie probably gets shown the woman he should marry that'll start lineage malarkey, which culminates in said obsessed future fanboy coming about. The choosing of those three is decided to occur on his daughter's birthday so he can easily keep mental track of how their power development is doing. There also might be some scientific curiosity going on in his head that's wondering how his mighty grown kid will directly compare super growth-wise to an adult just granted abilities in a way more similar to his own origin. Unsorted General Season Thoughts. Post-Crisis, everybody who was devo-absorbed after Becky became the main vessel survived as a DNA remnant that reflexively grew out of Ralph's flesh after he gained control once again. Her luck plus his stretch is what allows this. Basically, they all would have been moles or something for a bit, and Star Lab magical medical malarkey would save them later. The original Never Explored Timeline Barry, who didn't make Flashpoint, must have convinced this main one not to save Nora because he realized how Eobard would just keep going for more ridiculous revenge feats if he gets stopped by two mortal enemies at this particular point. Eddie might be the only Thawne capable of eventually spawning that just mentioned descendant because he possesses genetic mental fluidity, whatever, which lets somebody be molded into an incredibly obsessed individual. That might also be necessary for the meta-enabling physiological bits. Learning about Allegra and Chester's face-off with first fake Harrison in the Cortex probably reminded him of his myriad encounters with said fellow under such circumstances. Going over all this, and eventually recalling when that dude talked about more speedsters than just us two, coupled with his recent Still Force-contained meditation vision action, inspired his empowering of those three new folks. The Cobalt Crystal seems to be calcified negative speed force energy. Long before the actual thing got created, its deity world of origin must have blasted ideas into Professor Zoom's head about said element working good as a protective resin for time spheres. Regardless of whether former Detective Redemption or yet another rebooted universe comes about, a new, less likely to self-destruct Eobard would be born in a just created future. So bad guy always wins here. Barry appeals to Eddie's ego, not his righteousness, and this inflated self-worth center is another negative thing in the end. After all, even if the guy's doing good deeds left and right, there's still room for plenty of badness when it's just done via way of feeling superior for being capable of saving them. Not so true Blue's resurrection and molding into a villain almost definitely happened in baby Nora adult future rather than present day zaniness because all jealousy erupting flashy reminders need to be protected by temporal blind spot stuff. The Spectre must have been helping prevent those other negative forces from totally crushing regular Speed 1. Eddie's super development would have only really started after entering the actual empowering mini-realm itself, so no present positive could sense him training and interrupt everything before ultimate plan junk ensued. The negative Speed Force can revive non-existent entities like Plated Problem Child so easily because its natural function is simply just deleting stuff from history. Its counterpart would just be for keeping what currently exists in a mortal comprehensible shape. Those recently brought up unseen error points must be moments where ripple effects get rendered pretty much worthless because too many past things are always minutely changing them even when time travelers do stuff millennia away. For instance, no matter which people are born before the Old West, it'll never change how many folks frantically fire bullets at one another during arranged duels. By only attacking with no mask in public, Zoom ends up framing the Earth Prime Hunter's Allman, just like Thawne did by confessing to Nora's murder as Harrison Wells. Hey look, he copied something else from Eobard. In addition to being his normal dickish self, non-bearded hairy face was probably extra looking down on Eddie in the negative Speed Force because he thought it was just a form said entity was taking to mock him. Timeline collapsing shenanigans must be more grandiose now because the most recent multiverse got partially created by someone who's seen at least two deeply personally connected individuals fade from existence right before his eyes. Basically, his mere mortal mind's subconscious made the new everything a bit glitchier than the purely omniscience arranged before. Endings are a pain, but all of you are fantastic. See ya.